Hello, everybody. Welcome. I'm Neil Chase. I'm the CEO at CalMatters. And I want to welcome you to this evening's Props to You. This is the fourth of 5 in our series about the 2020 election and the often confusing propositions that are on California's ballot. In these discussions, we're taking questions from voters and asking them directly to people on both sides of the propositions. We want to find out what the results are going to be if you vote yes or you vote no, and what that means for Californians. Tonight, we're looking at big tech. The first one is Prop 22, which addresses whether gig companies like Uber, Lyft, and DoorDash should have the leeway to keep workers classified as contractors instead of employees. And then in the second half, we'll evaluate Prop 24, which would give more teeth to the state's new privacy laws, limiting how tech firms use our data and increasing the fines for violating kids' privacy. Our reporters will ask the questions from ordinary voters to the people on both sides of the propositions. And we're going to learn from each of our speakers tonight what a yes vote means, what a no vote means. We have written a lot about this. We did an election guide about the propositions. It's on our website, calmatters.org. It's got everything you need to have informed decisions when you fill out the ballot. And when you're there, take a look at the voter guide, use it in your choices, and please consider becoming a subscriber to our newsletter, or maybe giving us a donation. We're a nonprofit news organization, and we can only do this with donations from people like you. One of the best ways we've done the coverage this year of the election is with our Propositions Explained in a Minute videos. We do just that. We give you a short, concise summary of each proposition in a minute. And we're going to kick this off with the explainer video about the first proposition we're discussing. So we're going to start off with the one for Proposition 22, featuring moderator Lauren Hepler on the screen, and then she'll kick it off in person right after that. Thanks for joining us.
For California gig workers, the last few years have involved a lot of driving in circles. Uber and Lyft drivers have organized protests and honked their horns over a new state law that was supposed to change how they get paid. Now, they're back in the middle of another big money battle.
I'm CalMatters economy reporter Lauren Hepler, and this is what you need to know about Prop 22 in under a minute.
California's new labor law was supposed to reclassify thousands of contract workers as employees, giving them higher pay, healthcare, and family leave. But companies like Uber and Lyft haven't complied. They've threatened to shut down and say the law would force them to cut jobs and raise prices. Instead, the gig companies want voters' help rewriting the rules with Prop 22. It would offer workers a few new benefits, but not as many as the state law. Gig companies kicked off their campaign with more than $100 million and have kept adding since. Labor groups are fighting back. They say the pandemic is a prime example of why drivers need the stronger protections of current laws, not this milder alternative. Vote yes on Prop 22 to allow gig companies to limit contractors' benefits. Vote no if you think gig companies should treat and pay drivers like employees. And remember, there are already lawsuits flying over gig worker rules, so it could be a bumpy road to Election Day. For more information on Prop 22 and everything on the November ballot, visit calmatters.org.
Hi everyone, I'm Lauren Hepler, economy reporter for CalMatters, and I'll be your moderator for our Q&A about Prop 22. We gave you the background in the video, but now we're going to talk in more detail about what will happen if you vote yes or no on Prop 22. Joining us tonight to answer those questions are two people who represent the yes and the no campaigns for Prop 22. On the yes side is David Cruz, Communications Director for the League of United Latin American Citizens, and on the no side is Steve Smith, Communications Director for the California Labor Federation. As Neil mentioned earlier, this is a Q&A, not a debate. The goal is to ask voters questions directly to David and Steve, who will answer those questions one after the other, and do so as succinctly as possible in plain English. To make sure we stick to that plan, we've got a few ground rules. You will both answer the same 4 questions submitted by voters to start out, but viewers, if you've got your own questions, please write those into the Ask a Question chat box below, and I'll select a live question to ask. And for every question, David and Steve, you will each get 2 minutes to answer. And remember that our event team will ping you a 30 seconds left alert, so you know it's time to wrap up. And we will also alternate who gets to answer each question first. If you do feel inclined to rebut something the other person said, you can, but know that your rebuttal will be counted towards your total 2-minute response. This is not a presidential debate, so I will step in when we hit 2 minutes so that voters get all their questions answered. Finally, for our audience, please do stick around until the end. We'll do an Insta poll after the Q&A to see how everyone would vote on Prop 22. All right, so now that we've got the ground rules out of the way, let's kick off with our first voter question. And this is one I get a lot. This person says, this proposition, Prop 22, doesn't apply to me, but I do want to vote on what benefits workers the most. Yes or no? It's confusing. Steve, you have 2 minutes to respond.
So it is confusing the way it's written, but I think we can boil it down to be really simple. What Prop 22 is really all about is some of the largest corporations in California, if not the world, trying to exempt themselves from all labor laws that workers in the state of California have fought for decades. We're talking about things like a minimum wage, unemployment insurance, workers' comp if you get injured on the job, paid sick leave, paid family leave. All of these protections would be completely wiped out by Proposition 22 with respect to the about 700 to 800,000 gig workers in the state. The companies have spent so far, and this is a running total, about $185 million. That's more money than any one ballot campaign has spent in American history. And they've done this to eliminate basic protections that all workers in California deserve and should be entitled to. So we're strongly advocating a no on Proposition 22 position, along with the support of about 50,000 drivers who are organizing against Proposition 22 across the state, as well as Vice President Biden, Senator Kamala Harris, civil rights icon Dolores Huerta, Bernie Sanders, Elizabeth Warren, and many, many more, all saying no on Proposition 22.
Thank you, Steve. David, you have 2 minutes to answer the question.
Well, thank you. I want to first thank CalMatters for the opportunity to be here tonight. I want to thank the drivers who are out there at this very moment, earning a living, providing for their families. I know many of them. Some of them are my friends, and I use the service. I use it for rides and for deliveries. And so this is why I got involved in this measure. I'm not with any special interest. I don't work for the companies. I'm not here to speak for them. I'm here to speak for the drivers. And here's what I heard from the drivers. The drivers are telling me, and you asked about benefits, that's the question from the viewer or the listener. They want flexibility. They want to have the opportunity to choose for themselves when they work, where they work, how they work. And they want to make as much money as possible. And I'll give you an example. I live in a somewhat rural community in Ventura County. So when my friend starts his shift, he starts here, but he gets a ride, let's say, over to LAX, and then he'll spend the rest of his shift or his time that he's wanting to drive, maybe in the LA area. He may end up downtown. He may end up over in Santa Ana. He gets to pick the rides and the routes that he takes because he wants to make as much money as possible. When I heard this from the drivers, and I heard it from a lot of them, then I started to look into the data and the research that had been done. I weighed this, the benefit of a minimum wage job, or how could we keep as many jobs for as many people as possible with the best benefits that we could get them. Now, can we improve and continue to improve? Yes, you're the public. You're going to make that happen. But tonight, I'm here because I want to keep as many jobs in California with the best possible benefits available. Thank you.
Thank you, David. Our next question is from Doug in Sunnyvale, who wants to ask about the estimated 1/3 of time that drivers don't actually have a passenger or delivery in the car, which would not be paid under Prop 22. And Doug says, I have heard that most Uber and Lyft drivers work for both companies. When they are giving a ride for one, does that count as downtime for the other? That seems like it would make a lot of difference. So David, you have the first 2 minutes on this question.
I don't know the technical part to the second question, but on the first, I know this. You're correct. The drivers do turn on more than one app at a time, and they're trying to pick and choose the rides that they take, the opportunities that are before them. They even look at the rating of the customer because some customers are going to tip more than others. I mean, let me tell you, some of these guys are very shrewd in terms of how they choose their time. I would do the same thing. So They're getting paid for the time that they're engaged with a customer or a delivery. That's called engaged time. And the study that I saw from UC Riverside said this, and I know you're going to hear other numbers, but it said this to my viewer in Sunnyvale, that when you're engaged and you're working, let's say 5 hours a week, that's the minimum amount that I saw in that study. They were making $25.61 an hour. And to me, simple math says that beats minimum wage. Yes, on 22 would guarantee across the state of California that a driver is going to make 120% of minimum wage. So that's considerably more. And plus, they can make all the commissions that they can earn.
Thanks, David. Steve, you now have 2 minutes to answer that same question.
And it's a really important question because these are the fine print details that I think voters ought to know. The fact of the matter is when Uber and Lyft talk about what David mentioned was minimum earnings is what they call the term in the measure. They're talking about what's called engaged time. That does not count for when a driver, after giving a ride, for example, has to sanitize the vehicle. Remember, we're in the midst of a pandemic. That does not count for the times that drivers are waiting to get a ride to pick up. It accounts, non-engaged time accounts for about a third of an overall driver's time. So when you factor all of that in, UC Berkeley researcher Ken Jacobs said the drivers are going to earn about $5.64 an hour under Proposition 22. That's almost $8 less than minimum wage in the state of California. And we are talking to literally tens of thousands of drivers across the state who are telling horrific stories about having to live in their cars, having earning so little that they have to rely on government assistance just to have a meal at the end of their shift. These are the kinds of horror stories that arise when corporations abdicate their responsibilities to treat workers fairly. And Proposition 22 is just a big money ploy by Uber, Lyft, and other giant corporations to solidify this exploitation in law. That certainly is not something any of the drivers I talk to, I know personally want. They actually want to earn a decent living. They want to get paid for the work that they do in a fair manner. And we can talk about the so-called benefits that Uber and Lyft are offering when that question arises. But I will tell you on wages alone, this is a terrible deal for the workers in California.
Thank you, Steve. So you heard both of our speakers just now mention very different estimates for how much drivers make. You can go to calmatters.org. This is an issue we've been reporting on extensively. Our next voter says, I've read the news about current lawsuits in state courts over Uber and Lyft not complying with AB 5 and their threats to take their business out of California. So if Prop 22 does not pass, are Lyft, Uber et al. Going to make good on their threat to pull out of California? Or is it too big of a customer base? For customers like me, should I be worried that I won't be able to rely on rideshare companies if Prop 22 doesn't pass? Steve, you have the first word on this one.
Obviously, I'm not in the boardroom at Uber or Lyft, so I don't know what their thought process is. But what we know from history is that they make this threat often. They have made this threat literally in every jurisdiction that has attempted to regulate their lawless operation in one way or another. In Austin, Texas, for example, there was a local ordinance that was passed regarding fingerprint checks for drivers to ensure that passengers were safe when they were riding Uber and Lyft. Uber and Lyft didn't like that. They actually did pull out of Austin for a very short time. Then they used their lobbying heft to change the law in the Texas legislature and came back. But the interesting thing that happened when Uber and Lyft actually did follow through, this is the one and only time that that's happened, and left for a short time, there was a co-op that sprung up to provide exactly the same service called Austin Rides. except they treated their drivers fairly. They paid a living wage. They actually protected the passengers that were riding with their company. And I suspect that this is just another attempt by Uber and Lyft to threaten California voters, to threaten even their own drivers, that if they don't get their way, they're going to take their ball and go home. I don't suspect that that will happen because California is the largest market in the United States. Without California, Uber and Lyft is a house of cards that would come crashing down. So I don't suspect the threat is real. But the reason that they're making it is to try to scare voters like you. And that's really unfortunate because what we ought to be focused on is the facts here and what this measure would actually do to drivers. Thank you.
David, you have 2 minutes to respond.
Well, I can't, as Steve cannot, I cannot speak for the companies in terms of their corporate position. Here's what I do know. I can tell you that what I've seen in AB5, and then I compared to Yes on 22, is the guarantee that I wanted to see was how many drivers would we be able to keep in California if the model changes, for instance, and we're talking now about wholesale hiring of workers. How many workers would we really be talking about? I don't believe that a company, Uber, Lyft, or any small business, or any business rather, not small, but any business, is going to be driven into a position to be forced to hire however many people they're told they're going to hire according to what the market is going to demand. Now, what does that mean for you, the writer? Here's what we would anticipate: the rates would change. There may be fewer drivers around. In some areas like mine, because I don't live in Los Angeles or San Francisco or the Bay Area, they may see fewer drivers. If the time gets too long or the service gets too expensive, I'm not going to use it. And a lot of consumers would not. So you're the one who's defining the model in California. What Yes on 22 is here to do is to give you, the public, and the drivers the opportunity to decide for yourselves what kind of a future you want in this economy. Now, I know that the economy is bad for everyone, and communities of color have been hard hit by COVID-19. These jobs, they've seen a drop in business, 60 to 70%. But the description that they're sleeping in their cars and somehow the company is to blame would be no truer than someone saying that my clients are to blame because I've had less work during the pandemic. That's the reality we're all dealing with. And I don't think anybody in California would keep a job that's paying them $5 and what was it, Steve? 62 cents? I mean, that's insane to believe that that truly is what these individuals are earning. Because guess what? That means we're thinking they're not smart enough to figure out that they ought to be doing something differently or they ought to do this job differently. That's not what my friends are telling me. They know how to put this schedule together and they don't want to have somebody else tell them how to do it. And their biggest concern, that they won't keep some of those golden benefits that Lorena Gonzalez talks about when you're going to
Thanks,
see a
David.
few keeping them.
We're
Thank you.
hitting our 2-minute limit on that one. Thank you both for your answers. Our next voter, Freddie, has a question about the 7/8 supermajority that would be required for lawmakers in Sacramento to make changes to Prop 22 later if it does pass. Freddie says, I would agree that AB 5, the current state law, needs to change or be removed, but a ballot measure that is etched in stone does not seem like a solution either. Won't approving Prop 22 just make the situation even more confusing for workers and companies? David, you have the first 2 minutes to answer Freddie.
Thank you. Freddie, the reason why it's a 7/8 percentage is because we want to make sure that the lawmakers in Sacramento who didn't ask us what we wanted when they passed AB 5, and which is why they've had to carve out more than 100 exemptions or exceptions, we want to make sure that they understand what you, the voters, are going to want in this election. If you go yes on 22, we don't want to make it easy for the lawmakers to just on a whim change it. And by the way, you ought to know this, that the Constitution of the state has only one provision for how you can undo a statute that's mandated through initiative, and that is you've got to go back to the voters and do another one that's going to overturn whatever you, the voters, have decided. So, yes, this is a serious matter, and we want the lawmakers in Sacramento to take us into account. What would they be afraid of? If you make your decision this election period, you've been given the first opportunity, something you were denied until now, as were the drivers. This is why the 7/8 is an important protection.
Thank you, David. Steve, what's your answer on the 7/8 supermajority requirement?
I'll get to that in just a second, but I have to go back to something David said earlier with regard to wages. He said that anybody who's smart wouldn't work for $5.64 an hour. Every driver I know is smart. Every driver I know is entrepreneurial in spirit. Every driver I know is working their behinds off to try to make whatever they can. The fact of the matter is, Uber and Lyft set the rates. So if somebody's making $5.64 an hour, it's not because they're not smart, it's because their bosses are exploitative. So I just wanted to get that across before I move on to the 7/8 question. The 7/8 is actually one of the more pernicious provisions in this ballot measure. Essentially, it means this ballot measure can never be changed. It's permanent in nature. As we all know, 7/8 of the legislature aren't going to agree on anything ever, and certainly not on changing a ballot measure. The other thing that's really interesting about the 7/8 to me is that there are provisions that are not actually in the ballot measure, but they're included in the section about the 7/8. So the ballot measure doesn't do something at all. But the 7/8 requirement exists to change it, which is completely insane. I will give you an example. When it comes to collective bargaining, which is the right of all workers in this country, if they would like to organize and they would like to come together and join a union, they should be able to do so. But under the measure, it says that a 7/8 majority of the legislature would have to okay their ability to bargain collectively. That is absolutely what we would call a union busting measure, an anti-worker measure, and it's something that they just slipped in. Again, you'll see this throughout the measure. There's a lot of fine print, a lot of things that they just slipped in that I think are not going to get much.
Thanks so much, Steve. Appreciate it. I know there's a lot to cover on this one, but we are getting a ton of great questions from our live audience. So thank you so much for sending those. The one I wanted to ask is from Neil Clark. He says, I'm concerned about the ways in which this proposition may influence other industries going forward. If Prop 22 passes, are we going to see similar initiatives from unrelated industries in the future? David, I know this is a bit of a turn of the screw, but you have the first word on this question.
Look, I think it's a fair question, Neil. I think that's something that you, the voters of California, as I, will make that kind of a decision. Look, here's what I've seen in my life and working with companies, and I've tried to be someone who reaches across many aisles to do that. I don't think we have to look at business as adversarial. I think we need to engage them. I think we need to engage them seriously. I think we need to look for their investment into our communities. And I am in favor of things that are going to be more equitable for our entire workforce across the state. What I find strange in the comments being made tonight by people who oppose yes on 22, they haven't mentioned how many people keep their jobs and have the opportunity to earn a living. That is why I am here, because in addition to the flexibility for the driver, and you're going to determine how you want to work, there's also the choice of being able to keep your job, not be told by someone else, I'm sorry, but your job is gone. So we're going to define the kind of workforce we want in California. And I hope that as we do that, we think about what is going to benefit the greatest number of people with the best possible benefits, not what is going to benefit a few people and the rest are simply told, sorry, there just isn't an opportunity here for you. There is no guarantee with an AB5 for that. Yes on 22 is going to give us that opportunity.
Steve, what are your thoughts on this question about other industries?
Well, first of all, this is not a referendum on AB5. This is an effort by Uber, Lyft, Instacart, and DoorDash to carve themselves out of every single labor law that we have in the state of California that workers have fought to enact over decades. So I just want to make sure we're clear about what this is and isn't. In terms of the question, I think it's an incredibly pertinent one. Listen, if Walmart decided tomorrow that they were either going to force the state to allow them to pay $5.64 an hour to their workers, or they were going to up and leave the state, or perhaps spend $200 million on a ballot measure that would allow them to pay sub-minimum wages, I think that's a huge concern. We wouldn't allow that in the state of California for Walmart. We wouldn't allow that for any other business. You know, my dry cleaner, immigrant-owned, family-owned business has been really hit hard by the pandemic. You know, I talk to them every time I go in and we talk about how things are going. Things are tough. But you know what they haven't done? They haven't said, well, I'm going to start paying my workers $5 an hour because things are tough. They want to take care of their workers. They want to build their business back the right way. And that's the kind of values that we have in the state of California. We're not about to let Uber, Lyft, Walmart, or any other large corporation put a gun to our head and say, either you do what we want or workers are going to lose their jobs. That's just simply not the reality here in this state.
Thanks, Steve. We're getting a lot of questions about potential ripple effects, this whole idea of the future of work, how other industries could be impacted. I want to ask one more question, and we'll just do a minute to respond each on this one if we can for both of our speakers. This question is from Joe, and he says, Prop 22 appears to exempt only a small number of companies. How will other professions such as freelance writers be impacted, if at all? Are they covered by this initiative? Steve, do you want to start with taking that one?
They are not. This initiative has nothing to do with anyone or any worker or business other than those in the so-called gig economy, which are represented by Uber, Lyft, DoorDash, and Instacart. So it will have no impact on freelancers, on musicians, on any other industry whatsoever. What it will do is set a horrible precedent for the state of California. It will say that big corporations who can spend enough can write their own laws to exempt them from basic protections that all workers deserve. That's not a direction we want to go in the state of California.
David, final thoughts here. What would you say on this issue of whether this measure would have implications for other types of workers or what it could mean going forward for them?
I would encourage the person who asked the question to please look at your ballot. It does refer only to the app-based drivers for now, but here's what I would ask you to consider in total when you look at this question, and that is this. Historically in California, what has happened is we've had some industries that have had great benefits for some. Not all the people who work in California benefit from that. I would ask my friend Steve, why haven't they helped the farm workers? Why haven't they helped the essential workers who have been faced with these kinds of injustices? And yet I haven't heard a peep from them. I'll tell you why. This particular measure enables them, if they can kill it, to go after the low-hanging fruit, a lot of them. And he never answered the question, how many people will get to keep their jobs and how many people will lose them? We've had as much as 950,000 drivers. How many of them will survive if Yes on 22 fails? That's why I'm here.
David asked me a question. May I respond to that?
We'll give you 30 seconds, Steve.
Okay. So David asked specifically about farm workers. David, the labor movement, as you probably know, has been fighting for farm workers for decades, which is why Dolores Huerta supports a no on 22 position. You also brought up something I think is really important with respect to farm workers. They have the right to organize. This measure would take that right away from every single gig worker in the state of California.
Thank you, Steve. Appreciate it. I know we're getting into some big issues here. Prop 22 right at the center of this conversation about what the future of work is going to look like, not just in California, but the rest of the country. I want to thank both of our speakers, David Cruz, Communications Director for the League of United Latin American Citizens, and Steve Smith, Communications Director for the California Labor Federation. And for all of our viewers out there, please take our Zoom poll, vote yes or no on Prop 22 right now. Let's see where we're standing before Election Day. We'll see the results during the break before our Q&A on Prop 24. David and Steve, thank you very much for taking the time to answer voters' questions. And stick around. We will be back shortly with part 2 on Prop 24.
Hello, welcome to the second half of our show. We're going to have a Q&A about Proposition 24. I am Laurel Rosenhall, a California politics reporter with CalMatters, and we're going to begin this conversation with a short video I made that explains Prop 24 in just 1 minute. So let's go to that, and then we'll have the conversation.
Most fights over data privacy shape up like this. Big tech on one side, privacy advocates on the other. But the privacy fight on your ballot this year? It's complicated. 2 years ago, California passed the first data privacy law in the nation. Now you can ask businesses for all the information they have about you and tell them not to sell your data. But the man who pushed for that law after a dinner party conversation with a Google engineer says it's not strong enough. So he put Prop 24 on your ballot.
Hi, I'm Laurel Rosenhall, political reporter with CalMatters, and I'm going to explain Prop 24 in less than a minute.
Prop 24 would change California's privacy law in several ways. It would let you tell businesses to limit the use of sensitive data, such as your exact location and health info, stop businesses from holding onto your data for longer than necessary, triple the fine on companies that violate children's privacy rights, and create a new state agency to enforce the privacy law. Privacy advocates who supported the law 2 years ago are split over this measure. On one side, Alistair McTaggart, the Bay Area real estate developer who pushed for the first privacy law, has spent more than $4 million on Prop 24. On the other side, several privacy advocates say Prop 24 would actually hurt consumers by delaying a rule in the existing law and by allowing tech companies to grab your data when you leave the state. The tech industry? It could just sit this one out and let privacy advocates fight among themselves. So vote yes if you want to change California's privacy law, and vote no if you don't. Learn more about this proposition and others at calmatters.org. For CalMatters, I'm Laurel Rosenhall.
Can someone turn my video on, please? Hi. So sorry about that. We're back here with two guests who are going to help us understand Proposition 24. We'll be using the same format that Lauren did for the discussion on Prop 22. And on the yes side, we have Jamie Court, who is the president of Consumer Watchdog. On the no side, we have Richard Holliber, who is the Executive Director of Consumer Federation of California. And we have consumer advocates on both sides. Just to remind you both about the discussion guidelines here. I'm going to ask you both 4 questions that we got from voters, but we still want viewers. We would like you to join in and ask questions in the chat box as they come up. And for each question, you'll each get 2 minutes to respond directly. If you feel inclined to rebut something the other one says, you may do that, but it will count against your 2 minutes. So we ideally would like you to use your time to answer the voters' questions rather than to argue with each other. And again, we will do another Instapoll after the Q&A, so stay tuned for that. Just to begin with question number 1, this is from Tom Kemp. How much closer does Proposition 24 get California to the European Union's GDPR, the General Data Protection Regulation gold standard, compared with our current law we have in California that's known as the CCPA? Should we enjoy the same rights that Europeans get? And Jamie, you can go first, and then we'll go to Richard.
Thanks, Laurel. I want to say that the important part of Prop 24 is it actually enshrines the previous California Consumer Protection Law. That law was only put in because of the threat of a ballot measure, and it put into place the strongest privacy regime in America. This law, Prop 24, would extend it, and it would bring in significant aspects of the European system, a European-style privacy commission, the right to limit data collection, the right to limit data storage, the right to limit data limit data minimization, so they can't collect more information than necessary. It puts in a whole bunch of GDPR standards that then allow for us to get equity with the European nations, and actually possibly get parity and have what is basically a faster track trade regime. But the important part of this law, as Mike Hiltzik, who's the Pulitzer Prize winning LA Times columnist, wrote, is if we don't pass this law, we are not going to save what we have as the toughest law in America, because the assault on that law after this was passed in 2019 was extreme. And we just barely staved off the financial and online industries from amending it. This Prop 24 would say we have to allow more pro-privacy measures, but the legislature cannot amend it to take away privacy measures. That's the first real important part of this, that it allows for more privacy measures, but prevents us from getting assaulted again with less privacy measures. And then, of course, it adds some really important things that we have in Europe. Preventing the use of, preventing companies from using our geolocation, our sex, our race, our very most private sensitive data from being used, not from being sold or shared, but from being used. And that's really important all across the board.
Okay, Richard, 2 minutes.
Sure. Well, thanks for the forum, and it's great to be here with my good friend Jamie. I hope to see you in person after the pandemic. Unfortunately, Proposition 24 substantially reduces the rights that Californians enjoy under current law. And that's why a coalition opposing it includes groups such as the ACLU, the League of Women Voters, Dolores Huerta, labor and civil rights leader, California Nurses Association, the California Alliance for Retired Americans, Consumer Federation of California, Color of Change, and many others who fight all the time for the rights of Californians. Now, it does contain some good stuff. We acknowledge it, but the good is far outweighed by the takeaways from current rights. And it also is almost impossible to amend this, as you read the very strange language about amendments. So first, it enshrines pay for privacy. Now, this is fundamentally unfair, and it expands pay for privacy. So what this does is create the electronic version of freeway express lanes for those who can afford to pay more for privacy, and traffic jams for the rest of us. And we know we need to have good broadband connections. The pandemic has made it clear it is vital. It is fundamentally wrong to punish millions of people who are struggling to survive by saying you got a choice to make. You either get good connections or you get privacy, not both. It also reduces your right to have privacy when you travel outside of California. One word change in this 52-page long law takes away the privacy of your devices the minute you cross the California border. It also makes it harder for people to opt out of the selling of their information. And that is another takeaway. So when you look at the entirety of 27,000 words, the harm is embedded in the fine print. And that is something that we have to bring to the attention of voters. We need to scrap this thing. We have a brand new privacy law that only became enforced July 1st of this year. We need to have an opportunity to see what needs fixing and then fix it. And then if we can fail time after time, then you go to the ballot. That has not happened here. This is a violation of the rules around how you go to the ballot.
It's time to move on. And the question was about the European standard. So in 10 seconds, does this Prop 24 get us closer to the European standard in your opinion, Richard?
It does not. It is riddled with loopholes. It is written for Facebook.
Thank you very much.
Companies.
Great. The next question comes from Sarah France in Ukiah, who says that she runs a retail business. COVID-19 has made me move more of it online. I think I got my head wrapped around the previous CCPA Act that the state passed a couple years ago. Now, if Prop 24 passed, what more modifications would I need to do? I'm thinking I would need to come up with money for legal help to make sure I'm compliant, as well as purchasing new tech to do so. How would the passing of Prop 24 not hurt businesses like mine that are trying to stay afloat right now? And we'll give this first answer to Richard this time.
Thank you very much. Well, this is a big problem with Prop 24, and there's so many problems with the way it's written. It is so dense, indecipherable, and confounding that this is one of those rare ballot measures that has created an alliance that runs the gamut from the ACLU, from Color of Change, from the League of Women Voters to various small business organizations. Look, we have a brand new privacy law. It only became enforceable July 1st of this year. The cost of business to comply with that law, estimates range into many, many billions of dollars. Now, before we know whether or not it's working and what needs to be fixed, they got to start all over again and rewrite and redesign and retrain their entire workforce at a cost of additional billions. And it's not just the consumers who are struggling to stay afloat during a pandemic and an economic crisis. Small business is closing their doors. So the timing of this is absolutely disastrous. This ballot measure will not do anything that will hurt Google, Facebook, Amazon, these other corporations that are very silent, and their silence is telling. They do not have a problem with Prop 24, but for small businesses, this is going to be a devastating harm to them. And this is one of the reasons why 25 newspapers have editorialized no on Prop 24, including the San Francisco Chronicle that described what a disastrous language, this language will end up in court and be fought over for years. The San Jose Mercury News that said the same thing. This harms small business and it does nothing to impact big companies like Google, who get greater latitude to use your data in ways that we don't want them to use it.
Thanks, Richard. Jamie, how does this not hurt small businesses?
Well, it actually helps them because it raises the threshold for small businesses who have to or are covered by it. So it helps small businesses. This initiative is a cleanup on the other initiative, and it is an important cleanup. It is an important cleanup because, as the LA Times said in editorializing for Prop 24, we could sink deeply into the behind-the-scenes drama and struggles, but in the end, the question for voters is whether Prop 24 would make privacy stronger, whether it goes far enough to make a meaningful difference, and whether it would enable the state to provide even better protections in the future. The answer to all three is yes. This law makes it easier because on small businesses because it increases the threshold for which small businesses are covered by it, but it also overlays with the current structure a whole bunch of new rights that protect small businesses and individuals from having their data used and from tracking us. Our precise geolocation could no longer be tracked within 350 acres. We have the right to see all the personal information stored, not just 12 months of data. And most importantly, there's a big data protection agency, which will have an enforcement staff, just like the Europeans, that is about the size of the FTC and allows for twice as big fines as the other law. So we triple the fines for child violations. This is a well-meaning law, and I find it really difficult to fight with my colleagues on this because I feel like it's inside baseball. The fact is, if we don't do this, Prop 24 will secure the previous law, and if we don't do it, it will be eviscerated in the next 5, 7, 2, 3 years by the industries in Sacramento are out to get it. We have to lock it in so that we have more privacy protections, not less privacy protections. And then the add-ons here are really extraordinary. And the add-ons don't just help individuals. They help small businesses be free from the Googles and the Facebook. And by the way, Facebook and Google are very much opposed. They have not come out because they know it would be a boon to the yes, but the Internet Ad Association is against this. Data broker.
Great. Thank you, Jamie. Thank you so much. We're going to move on to the next question. The voter says, my kids love spending time on YouTube and TikTok, but I worry that their videos could get into the wrong hands or that something totally inappropriate will come up in their feed. Does Prop 24 make social media any safer for kids? Jamie?
Oh, yes, it does. It makes it tremendously safer for kids. If you've watched the social dilemma, which is the quintessential Netflix film you all have to see if you haven't, about how kids are targeted, about how we're all targeted, but particularly families and kids. Two of the leaders of that film, Shoshana Zuboff and Roger McNamee, are very much in favor of Prop 24 because what it does is it prevents kids from being targeted. It allows you to know the algorithms that are targeting kids. The agencies have to get reporting from Facebook and Google about the algorithms. It prevents targeting based on sexual orientation, based on genetic disposition, based on race, based on sex, based on sexual preference, and it strengthens the ability of parents, if they have a problem, to go someplace. You can go to an agency and complain, and the fines when it comes to children are 3 times as big as what they are under the current law. So there is a way to pull back the algorithms and actually limit much of the profiling. There is the ability to basically opt out of the use of information that does target kids. And that's one of the things that I think Facebook and Google are most scared about with this law. They haven't stuck their neck out against it by putting money out there, but they have, and their association have been largely against it because it would limit the vast profiling. And most importantly, I find the companies will have to disclose to this agency what type of assumptions go into the algorithms, what the targeting is, and they have to disclose it to all of us. And that when you do that and you pull back the screen on how these algorithms go, that's when they can't stand the light of day, and it's a disinfectant. And sunshine is the best disinfectant for the type of targeting we see in the social dilemma.
Thanks, Jamie. Richard, do you think that Prop 24 does anything to make social media any safer for kids?
Well, first of all, let's be clear. Facebook, Google, and other big tech companies are not opposing Prop 24. And there have been reports, investigative reports, including a report in the Washington Post that showed that the first draft of this ballot measure was reviewed behind closed doors by Facebook and other big tech companies, and it was rewritten to accommodate them. So they have gotten exactly what they wanted. And that's why they're silent, because if they were publicly supporting it, people would smell a rat and they would vote it down. So they're being smart, they're keeping quiet. Now, the problem with Prop 24 is you have to take it all or leave it all. You can't dissect out just the few things that are good. And we say a few things are good and say, I want those few good things without taking all of the bad things that are in it. So it increases penalties for privacy violations of minors under the age of 16. That's good. That could have passed the state legislature as a standalone bill. But what Prop 24 also does is it eliminates your ability to remove information that has been in the public domain, which means on Facebook, on other social media websites, on Twitter, that is considered in clear language in Prop 24 a change from current law, by the way, that once it is in the public domain, you cannot have it deleted. And this has a very significant impact, particularly on immigrants. It's interesting, you know, they proclaim how they created this new thing, sensitive information, okay, that is more confidential. You know, they left out immigration status, and they also made it easier for law enforcement agencies to stop the deletion of information on someone's immigration status. So under 24, immigrants will be in greater fear of being deported, of being intimidated, of having their immigration status used against them. This is one of the many problems that are embedded in the fine print of 24. It's just like when you want to use an app or want to use online commerce, you have to say, I accept. You don't read through 40 pages of fine print. You say, I accept. Prop 24 has 52 pages of fine print, and you either accept it all or you reject it all. You have to reject it all and start fresh.
Thank you, Richard. We're going to move on now. We have another question from Neil Clark, who says he's generally in favor of even more stringent privacy regulations. So I'm confused by the opposition to Prop 24 from groups I would generally expect to support a proposition like it. If Prop 24 fails, will California lose momentum in advancing additional privacy regulations? And Richard, you can take that one first.
It will help the momentum go forward because Prop 24 reduces privacy rights. It enshrines pay for privacy. Horrible idea, and you can't fix that because it's got bad language that creates a floor, that's good, and a ceiling. It locks us into a very weak standard of privacy. And that's in Consumer Reports analysis. They're neutral, but they're very concerned that it cannot be amended. Same with EFF. They're neutral and concerned it can't be amended. The ACLU, first and foremost concern is that it cannot be amended, and they and us and other folks fight year in and year out to improve our privacy rights. We've stopped all the attacks, just about every single attack in the legislature on privacy, and we advanced the ball incrementally. And if Prop 24 was an incremental improvement, we'd support it. But when you look at groups like the League of Women Voters, ACLU and others saying on balance, this reduces your privacy rights, that is a good reason to reject this and go back to the drawing boards. I mean, look, I would recommend everyone go to the League of Women Voters analysis of Prop 24. It says pay for privacy. Prop 24 expands the ability of businesses to provide inferior service for consumers who don't pay to protect their confidential information. Opt out versus opt in. Prop 24 misses an opportunity to enact a consumer-friendly opt-in system. And instead, it keeps the burden on consumers to opt out. It makes opting out more difficult. It allows businesses to post a do not sell link and ignore a global do not sell thing you can program one time in your device or your phone. It takes away your privacy the second you leave the state of California and your cell phone pings a cell tower in another state, or a computer on geolocation says you're in another state. They can upload the contents of your device, private information. They can't do that under current law. It also weakens biometric data protection.
Maybe the question was whether the failure of Prop 24 would make it harder to advance privacy regulations in California.
My answer is that if Prop 24 is defeated, we're defeating a setback, a reduction, a rollback.
We're moving on
to get back to the work of improving our privacy, which we do.
How passionate Richard is. I've got to say, I find the opposition really hyperbolic and not realistic. The reality is, if Prop 24 fails, we will be facing an onslaught of bills next year and the year after, and we're not going to be able to head it off. The initiative allows for the legislature with a majority vote to further the purposes of the law. And furthering the purposes of the law, as I know because we wrote this law after 30 years of defending insurance reform, Prop 103 means if you pass a law to further the primary purposes of the initiative, that's okay, but you can't take away. And it's really important to enshrine what we have, but it's also important to allow for an opt-in if they want it. And they can have an opt-in if they could pass an opt-in, but we can't pass an opt-in. This is the strongest law in America we have. And this would make it even stronger. To allow for an opt-in, you'd have to go to a ballot again, you would have to go to the legislature again, but the legislature won't do an opt-in. So if we want to protect the opt-out, we should do Prop 24. If they want to pass an opt-in, it was specifically mentioned in the ballot arguments that the intent is to allow for an opt-in. And it was mentioned in the findings and the declarations. They left open the ability to do more in the legislature, just not to take away. And that's what we primarily want to do with Prop 24. But the next thing is, and the Consumer Reports said this to Mike Hiltzik, it's not going to survive without that provision. On the issue of pay for privacy, which I find disingenuous, we have that in the law now. If they can muster the votes to stop pay for privacy, go be it. I'm all for it. But pay for privacy basically is a way of looking at whether or not you treat people's privacy rights as a commodity. And you can only, you offer them a little money for giving up those rights. I don't agree with that either. But I also know if Prop 24 passes, we can still pass a law to get rid of it. This law doesn't do anything on opt-in or pay for privacy that isn't in the law, and it doesn't take away the right to change it in the future. And that's what's frustrating about the opposition. I think this goes back to a lot of inside baseball about when this initiative was withdrawn and the law came into effect. And it's easy to beat up an initiative that's 52 pages, but it's all very thoughtful. And as the LA Times says, it adds, it does not take away. And
I'm going to cut that answer off there, but there have been numerous questions coming in the chat, many from people who I believe are involved on both sides of this campaign. So, but a lot of them are related to this opt-in, opt-out question. And yes, as Jamie said, the opt-out piece is locked into existing law. So even if Prop 24 fails, Californians still have an opt-out system. But opponents like Richard really feel that that's a major weakness of this law. So why wasn't that proposed as a change in Prop 24? That is something that makes it very hard to use the existing law that we have. You have to go to 1 million websites and fill out 1 million separate forms. Why didn't you change the sort of fundamental basics?
I write Prop 24, but I can tell you this: there is an improvement in the law under Prop 24, and it goes to both opt-in and pay for privacy. The improvement is if a company doesn't want to post a "Do Not Sell" sign on its website and just wants to accept the signal on an app that says "Do not sell" or "Do not share," that company cannot offer a pay for privacy scheme. It can't offer more money not to opt in your privacy. It can't take away your internet speeds. So that is a way of trying to standardize that "Do not share, do not sell" signal. That is explicitly in the law. It is an improvement, and it does go to addressing that pay for privacy scheme. It is a big improvement.
So final question here has to do with.
May I respond to that? Yes. Because this is crucial. Jamie referred to Prop 103, and he and I know it well. That had really good language around what the legislature can do to amend it, and it was upheld by the Supreme Court in Amwest Surety, really key case. But Prop 24 has very odd language. It basically comes down to this: it can be amended with a majority vote of the legislature if it is consistent with its purposes. You have to read the purposes. There are 23 purposes. Only one addresses amendment. And it says this law should be amended if necessary to improve its operation, provided it does not compromise or weaken consumer privacy. That's good. While giving attention to the impact on business and innovation. We call that profit maximization. There's nothing that says amend it if by policy you want to strengthen privacy. This says amend if necessary to improve its operation. It's what we call workability.
Okay, thank you so much.
We're locked in.
One final question here has to do with smart speakers like the Alexa, for example. Many people are concerned about having these things in our homes and whether they're listening in on our private conversations. So does Prop 24 do anything about privacy related to these kinds of smart speakers? And we'll go Richard first and then Jamie.
Well, first of all, Prop 24 does not specifically address that, even though it is 52 pages that address minutia, which changes as technology advances. And that's another problem with Prop 24. You really should not turn on things like Alexa, but Prop 24 does not really do anything that would change the current business practices of companies like Amazon and others that provide these kinds of, they're really in a way eavesdropping devices. They have some good advantages that make our life, nicer in some ways, but they are eavesdropping devices. And we need to, enact strong laws specifically addressing the kinds of eavesdropping of Alexa. We introduced a bill that, thanks to the coronavirus, all these bills went away this year, that would stop smart TVs from turning on and actually watching you. And that's what some of them do. They watch you, they listen to you when your TV is on. I think we could get a bill like that through the legislature. Prop 24, the problem with it is a mile wide and an inch deep. Once you really look at it, it's very modest privacy protection that then becomes permanent because of this weird language. If anyone tries to improve it, the businesses go to court.
Not even clear if it would cover smart speakers. Okay, Jamie, does it cover smart speakers? Do we get any more privacy with these smart speakers?
We do, but I just want to address Richard's point briefly. There's a law article by David Carrillo, a Berkeley Law School professor, that really is clear. And I developed the law. We've tried AmWest case.
Sure.
Majority of the purposes of this initiative is to protect privacy. There's one small phrase about balancing with businesses. There's no question a court would only allow pro-privacy policies and not anything that's a takeaway. And we argued that with Prop 103 because the industry wanted to say, well, we had something about competition in the findings too. And that wasn't the main purposes of the initiative. The main purpose of the initiative is what the court looks to. And there's no question in my mind that you could do better privacy and they can't take it away. But on the smart speaker issue, I think it's really important because our group actually issued the first report showing the eavesdropping by Alexa. And this was years ago. And what this initiative does is stop the use of sensitive personal information that Alexa is collecting if you want to opt out of that use. So it will no longer be able to collect information like your religious or philosophical beliefs, your union membership, your precise geolocation. And this is really important because what Alexa does, when we found out in the patents, we actually got the patents from Alexa and from Echo too, from Amazon, from Google Echo, that they basically were having these systems divide to listen, to watch around the room when the speakers were off, to look at things so you can market kids with and others with. Well, this basically prevents them from using any of that sensitive information to market you. And Prop 24 also stops the use of automated decision-making technology, profiling requiring businesses' response that access these requests. So basically profiling in any form of automated decision-making has to be uncovered and has to be revealed. And when you reveal that kind of algorithm, Alexa isn't going to be able to do it anymore.
Can I just make...
So Jamie, you're saying that it will cover things like Alexa if people go and opt out. They take the steps to go to their profile and opt out.
Exactly. And or if they turn on the app that hopefully exists, or the internet browser that says do not share, do not sell.
Right. Which is current law. Let me just say this. Can I just... I
think you had the first 2 minutes. So I think we're going to wrap it up here. It's a little after 7 and we want to be respectful of people's time. So voters, we're putting up a Zoom poll. Please vote yes or no on the proposition and we can see how it will do. And thank you, Jamie, and thank you, Richard. Thank you both for taking the time to answer the questions. And thank you to everyone who attended. We'll be back tomorrow with our final Props to You event. And that one we're calling, wait, didn't we vote on these already? It will be a discussion of Propositions 14, 21, and 23, versions of which California voters have seen in the past. It'll also start at 6 o'clock tomorrow, and you can register to attend at calmatters.org/events. Please remember to vote. If you have any questions about how to vote, we have lots of resources on our website. We have videos that explain the props in 1 minute. We've got a voter guide, and we've got information on how to find your polling place or drop-off box, and much more. Please help us keep things going, like our voter guide and all these events and other coverage. Consider becoming a donor or a member of CalMatters, and including some financial support on our website. Good night, and thank you so much.